Coming up, why do we like people that we hate? Something about that really does stand out. We're going to talk about that right now on Depraved and Debaucherous. Thanks for listening in. I'm King of Podcasts. We usually fantasize about people we like, but that's not always the case. Yeah, well, maybe it's part of the thing about how we like people that are not good people with good intentions. Girls liking the bad boys, that cliche does stand in this argument. And there's a survey that researched that 1 in 3 adults say they fantasize about someone they hate. Heterosexual women are the least likely to report having these fantasies. And fantasizing about a hated person is a form of BDSM. Fantasies about hated individuals are also linked to personality traits and attachment styles. So yeah, part of the thing would be that we might hate somebody, but we might be aroused or attracted to them still, even before whatever made us hate them in the first place. You know, I would figure that happens a lot when you do have a lot of friends and people that you know. And then others that you might know from work, coworkers, or things like that. If you're very social, there are obviously some people that you probably don't like at all. And then you have some kind of onus with them, some kind of animus with them. And then you fantasize about them. Something about them creates a sexual tension between you two. It was a survey done of 4,175 American adults that this writer, who is Justin J. Lehmiller, wrote for his book, Tell Me What You Want. And here's what he found out. 31% of adults said they had a sexual fantasy about someone they hate. And with 3% saying this is something they fantasize about often. So it's not uncommon for people to ever had this fantasy, but it appears relatively rare for a hated individual to be a recurring character in one's sexual fantasies. And whether people had fantasized about a hated person depended upon gender and sexuality to some degree. So they go along with that. And now, when we try to understand why do people fantasize about someone they hate? And so he wanted to look at how these fantasies connected to personality traits. These fantasies were linked to having more BDSM fantasies in general, and particularly fantasies about dominance and sadism. Thus, some people may find the idea of a hatred fantasy partner arousing because in that scenario they have some degree of power or control over the hated individual or can inflict pain on them. Well, why is it there's always a bunch of videos like, where in some porn videos, things like that, where you'll see guys like to find a character that is not liked as a female character, and then it gets embarrassed or gets put into the whole note of where you don't like them, but then you want to fantasize about them. You know what? I'll tell you as a great example. I'm pretty sure that guys, if you've gone to a strip club, there is some girl that you'll know that probably has talked to you and that you felt you were angry about, you hated after the experience of meeting with them, or somebody that you might have met at the store, like a customer service kind of thing where somebody just really rubbed you the wrong way. What's the chance you might even recognize them and talk to them? What about somebody that you might have tried to hit on or might have asked out? And now you have a hatred about them, but there's still something about them that you fantasize about them because of the possibility you gotten together with them some way, somehow. The takeaways that he got from this study is that while we're far more likely to fantasize about partners we love or like than those that we hate, it's not uncommon for someone disliked or even despised to appear in a sexual fantasy. However, different people seem to be having these kinds of fantasies for very different reasons. As with pretty much every other type of sexual fantasy, diverse psychological roots exist and may sometimes reveal something about someone, reveals about themselves, but also be a desire to mix pleasure and pain to add an element of thrill, or somebody because you don't see love and sex, it's necessarily going together. I'll tell you what, this is a great example, is in high school or college. Because I know there were girls that I didn't like in high school or college. And I remember, obviously it's the other way around, where somebody that hated me, and then I would say to myself, there would be some kind of a fantasy I would think about. Let me tell this story. It's pretty funny. There was a girl in 5th grade. I will not say her name. Maybe I'll give the first name, Jennifer. That's a pretty generic name. Well, I remember we had a Secret Santa thing going on for Christmas. And, everybody had to go and buy some kind of thing. And then everybody found out who the person they were going to have to buy a present for. Well, this girl, had it in for me for whatever reason, because a lot of the people didn't, I was a nerd in elementary and high school. No doubt about that. And I remember she bought me at the time. And by the way, she had money. So like, she wanted to buy like nice presents. She could have done that. But I know she got stuck with me. And I remember she bought me a bottle of Brut cologne. Brut, which is a very cheap, musty sounding, smelly kind of cologne. She took it basically as a gag where she just said, yeah, I gave you this because you smell bad. And that's the kind of, that was like, I got that from her. I'm like, okay. I don't think I ever used the Brut cologne at all. I don't think I ever did. Because I remember what it smelled like. I didn't like it. At the time, I was a Drakkar Noir fan. That was what was every guy wanted to have, especially in middle school. We were all early 90s, late 80s. We were all about Drakkar Noir because that stuff smelled good. That was what we had to have. I remember buying that when I was young. The 1.7 ounce. I remember it was like $20 at a time. It was so cheap. And it was one of the higher end colognes. Well, not higher end, but it was like a respectable cologne. Let's just say that. But that was a girl that after that, I will say, my puberty was kicking in around that time. And I remember fantasizing about her. Because she was very attractive. She was a brunette. And she just had a certain look. And I mean, I would hope that she was a lot. I mean, if I would have been, things could have worked out. I would have liked her, but for whatever reason, she didn't like me, so I couldn't like her because she treated me bad. That's why I didn't like her. I don't think it was a hate, but I knew I didn't. Well, it probably was hate because at that time I didn't know any better. I was a dumb kid, but I remember that. And I remember there was not a sexual fantasy at that point because it wasn't like that, but there was something about that I did fantasize about her after the fact. So this does give me a lot of point to that. And I don't know. I'm sure there were other girls that I felt the same way that I fantasized about as well. I remember there was another one I felt the same way. And, it was one of those girls that I would look at, I would stare at in class. We do those things, right? We're guys. What do you expect me to do? I was like, 14, 15 years old. What do you want me to do? So I did that. And it was a girl that didn't like me either. But she didn't like anybody, really. She just had some kind of an attitude on things. She just dressed cute that day, and I just kept looking at her. I would just keep looking at her direction. And I would do that thing where, like, if she starts looking at me, I would just quickly look away. That was what I was doing back in those days. So, yeah, this was what fascinated me about this. So, in this story, they conclude and say that if you've ever fantasized about someone you hate, you're definitely not alone. And there are any other possible reasons that the thought might have crossed your mind. So, avoid the temptation to overinterpret it. I let that go a long time ago. But this story right here came up to me, and it was not a bad idea to think about. So anyway, we'll leave it there. I don't know. I have fantasies like that. Maybe that just makes me a little depraved and debaucherous.